Hi, I'm Sam, and I'm going to be reviewing the Cask of Amontillado today for my restorative art class at Worcester Mortuary College. I've always been a fan of Edgar Allan Poe's work because he has a more dark way of thinking and he expresses things in a very macabre yet lighthearted sense. Some of his matters are very heavy, but they come across in a more lighthearted tone. So they're pretty interesting to read. I definitely am a fan. So our tale begins with Montresor. He's a man truly at his wit's end. He tells of how he's so fed up with his peer, Fortunado, and this story takes place in Italy. So, according to our narrator, Fortunado has been annoying, berating, and just all around impishly pestering him. And at this point, Montresor is finally going to get back at him for all of his transgressions, and in his own words, impunity, which comes up a couple of times in the book, which I think is a pretty interesting detail. And although some people might say that his revenge is a bit disproportionate. So, Montresor knows that Fortunado has no reason to doubt his intentions or to think he would do anything to harm him. So that really helps kick the plan into motion and gives Montresor that idea that he has the ability to do what he's planning to do. And recalling that Italians love vino, or wine as we Americans call it, he decided to use this great beverage to his advantage. Montresor finds Fortunado at the local festival, dressed up in a jesterly outfit with a bunch of bells, which again is another reoccurring concept in the story, and he's already drunk. Fortunado is clearly drunk and jovial, and overly, not nice, but overly friendly, with Montresor, which makes the plan a lot easier because he's able to tell him that he has a pipe of Amontillado wine down in his vault, catacombs, whatever word you prefer, and it could be a fake. So as he's telling Fortunado about this, he's saying things such as, "Oh, I don't know if it's real, and I don't know if this other person could tell me because they're kind of stupid, but you're so smart and you're so cool." So he's kind of playing into his ego. And after a bit of persuading and a bit of brown-nosing, Montresor finally wears Fortunado down enough to lure him back to his abode. So come on down, Fortunado. And the timing is good for Montresor because his own staff is out enjoying the festival. So he's able to get a couple of torches, or I think they call them flambeaux, but that's a French word, I was pretty sure, so I don't know. It's a bit confusing. But he gets the torches and he leads Fortunado down and down and down and down and down some more stairs, deep into the vaults of his home. So, when Fortunado gets a bit suspicious, like, where's the wine? Montresor offers to go back, because Fortunado also has a bit of a cough. So he's playing up into that ego again, like, oh, if you're sick, we can go back. If you're coughing, I don't want to make you feel bad. These are damp, dust basement. It's gross. You don't want to be down here. And that kind of pushes the ego again. So Fortunado's like, no, I'm fine. I'm good. It's all good. But he gives him some wine just to kind of persuade him, like, here's some wine anyway, let's stay warm, we're fine. The cough's not going to kill you, haha. And that kind of puts Fortunado at ease. And I also found it was interesting, like, the wine is kept in the catacombs with all these bones, because, like, there's bones lining the walls, which, that's not something I would personally do, but each their own, I guess. Italians. So, along a wall of stone and bone is a crevice. And it's big enough for Fortunato to fit into, obviously. And it's big enough for him to be chained into as well, which is exactly what happens. Because Montresor is telling Fortunato, hey, it's back there, just go back this way, just walk right in, and you'll see the Amontillado. And he's like, oh, okay. And Montresor pushes him in. Bada bing, bada boom, he's in there, he chains him up. Which, it's a little bit confusing on how it's worded, but it seems like he's chained around the waist and then with his arms. Which, that's the way I think it is, but I've seen a couple different arguments on which way it could be. So, he proceeds to build up the entryway of this crevice with more stone and more mortar, effectively closing Fortunado in. And during this process, Fortunato grows less and less intoxicated, and his cries and screams just kind of fall on deaf ears. But once Montresor is almost finished, Fortunado basically just goes, hey, buddy, haha, this is funny, let me out now. And he's kind of feebly pleading against his destiny, but his fate was sealed. So, Fortunado was chained to a wall in a damp vault, damp catacomb, damp cave. It's going to be a lot cooler because there's no natural light getting in, and this is where bones are stored, so you would think it would be a fairly stable condition. And the exact cause of his death isn't inherently specified, but I would personally assume it was starvation, dehydration. Some people think it's asphyxiation, but I mean, I do not think that's the case, because I don't think that Montresor was perfect with aligning his stones to the point where he couldn't get any air to Fortunato. Like, I think he wanted him to suffer. And asphyxiation, well, it could take a bit longer. It definitely wouldn't be as long as, say, starvation or dehydration. And also, the end of the story kind of says that Fortunato's body wasn't disturbed for 50 years. So, for the sake of this assignment, I'm going to just say he was found within a couple of weeks. Because 50 years, although it's possible that in the perfect conditions, there would be minimal damage, like if he was frozen, perhaps. But he is just, like, in a bog, mummified. But he's in a cave, so I'm just going to say he was found in a couple of weeks, so I can go with, like, the actual conditions, rather than the mummified body and be like, oh yeah, I couldn't restore it. I couldn't do anything for that. Embalming it wouldn't work because everything's dried up. I mean, I guess I could, like, rehydrate like a raisin, but that's a bit off topic. So, I'm going to say within 2 weeks. So, the chains that were on Fortunato along his wrists would put him in an upright position, which would kind of complicate the restoration process a bit. Because as his joints are being held up, he's likely slipped out of place. Like, he's probably flailing around, so he's probably got some dislocation, or, like, just pulled out of place from the chain holding it and, like, the weight, So, there's also, besides the joints being out of place, or his sockets just kind of popping out, there's probably a lot of blood settling in the lower extremities if he's being held up. So, there's also a high probability of purge coming out of, if his head's there, it could be coming out of his face, or it could be coming out of other areas. But the cool conditions of the catacombs definitely would have slowed this process significantly. Because if you think, you can have an unembalmed body in a cooler for quite a bit of time. So it wouldn't, well, not quite a bit, but you know what I mean. It wouldn't be as decomposed as somebody out in the middle of a desert, or somebody above ground where the sunlight's hitting and animals are at, because he's in a vault, and he's sealed within that vault, so there's less getting to him. So I start my process by disinfecting him. Because although there's less getting to him, we don't know what's on him. We don't know what he brought down. We don't know if he had a sickness, why he was coughing. So I would thoroughly disinfect inside and out. Just clean the mouth, pack any orifices that needed it. And then I would try to line him up. Like, I would wash him after disinfecting and such. I would try to line him up, though, so that his body was back where it kind of needs to be. Because before the embalming process, like, I want him to be where I want him. So I would try to pop things back in place, maybe sew things if I had to. I would use the mechanical. I would use any aids I needed. Surgical, multiple aids. So it also set his features, which, again, because he's only in a cool place, I don't think he would be as bad as he could be. He might have some drooping or such, but I don't think his features would be indistinguishable. I would also begin my embalming pretty soon after those steps, because I don't really want to push it any longer. But it's important to recognize that if the body had been down there for 50 years, I could not be embalming it. It just wouldn't work. Unless there was some magical condition where it just perfectly didn't get touched by a single element, not one drop of water. It wasn't hung in a weird way, just, unless that rainbow happened, it just wouldn't work. So, because this particular story is less violent than a lot of Poe's other works, the decomposition and aquapositioning should be my main challenges, but there shouldn't be excessive damage. It's not as though he was brutally beaten up, or his heart was torn out, or his eyes were torn out. There's a few other things that could have happened. So his skin might have drooped, but his skull should be intact, along with, I would assume, the muscles. And I could just kind of manipulate his face if it's droopy, before I embalmed him. because if anything was out of place, I could just take measurements, because even if his skin's drooping, his eyes would still be here. His eyes aren't going to really move much. I mean, they could dehydrate or fall. There's things that could happen. But the sockets would still be there, and the ears would probably still be fine too. So I could take the measurements of the ears, the eyes, the nose, whatever was in place still, and find where everything else matches up because of the facial proportions. So that would make things a lot more simple for me. I would also make sure to put massage cream on at different stages, just to make sure if he was dehydrated or anything, that he was staying nice and good. Now, to have an open casket viewing, I would embalm him next, obviously, which would be a multi-point injection with intermittent draining, which I would hope would put pressure back into the system to try to get the clots out of there. And multi-point because I'm not really sure the condition that each separate part is in, so I want to make sure that it gets thoroughly injected. So it could be dehydrated or edemic, depending on exactly how the conditions were, because you never really know. So without seeing it, I'm going to assume it could be either. So if it was edemic, I would use high index fluids with dehydrating agents, and if it was dehydrated, I would use a lot of low index fluids with added humectants. In either case, I'd add some dye, because how he was positioned, there would be a lot of draining and staining on the bottom area where you're not going to see, but the top should not be that stained, because again, with the hands up and stuff, you would think it would fall down more, so it could be covered by clothes. But yeah, I would add dye for sure. And then I would start my restorative process, which would not be too much after everything else I had done. I'd apply wax if needed. I would apply opaque cream cosmetics to add more color in if the dye didn't completely saturate. I'd also use a setting powder to keep everything in place, and more massage cream, moisturizer, whatever needs to be used to make him look better. And I would use lip wax if it was dehydrated or anything in the lips after they were already set and everything. I would take it to note. I'd put cotton where it needs to be. I'd fill the orifices, make sure that there was no purging. I would put on unionals. And then to finish up, I would just touch up with more wax if needed, and use any more airbrushing if I had to. Like, if something didn't look as concave as it should, I would just touch them up. But the overall restorative process would not be as challenging as other cases in this story, like the Hoppy Frog one with the tar. That would not have been fun. I don't know how they would have gotten the tar off, for one. But that is what I would do, and I hope you enjoyed.